Hi, I'm Brian Williams, and today's lesson is Triumphal Entry into Jerusalem. And our lesson comes from Matthew 21, verses 1 through 11. As we look at our lesson today, it reminds me of something from my childhood. I love wrestling. And as a loving wrestling, I love WWF, WWE, WCW, all those ECW. I loved Ultimate Warrior, Razor Ramon, Bret Michaels, Sting, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Triple H, Undertaker, Shawn Michaels, and The Rock. But the wrestler I loved the most was Hulk Hogan. I was a maniac, and I was a part of Hulkamania. And I love the way Hulk Hogan came in there, and when he always came into the arena, went wild. They went wild over everything he did. I mean, they threw all kinds of stuff toward him. That they loved him so much that everyone wanted to be a part of what he was doing. When Hulk Hogan left WWF, which is now WWE, and he went to WCW, so did the fans, so did the money. And when he left to come back, he left WCW to come back to WWE. So did the fans, so did the money, but also so did the viewership. And because of this, Hulk Hogan is named one of the best wrestlers alive. And because of that also, he's changed wrestling the way we see it today. Unfortunately, myself, I can admit that I was one of those who tore a shirt or two because of my affinity for Hulk Hogan. And I did get in trouble over it, and you don't do that either, but I got in trouble over it. But it goes to show that the love the people had for Hulk Hogan, that they still have today. Now let's raise that up a little higher. Our lesson today deals with Palm Sunday, and also it's what we call Palm Sunday, but it also deals with Jesus's triumphal entry into town. As we look at Matthew 21, we have to go back a little bit, because when we move forward back, we see that Jesus is on the backside of his ministry, coming toward the end of his earthly ministry. Now, Jesus is also, even though his earthly ministry is ending, his ministry is never ending, because he's still King of Kings and he's still Lord of Lords. Now, when we look in our lesson on today, we have to move back to the latter part of chapter 20 of Matthew, which is the first book of the New Testament, might I add. And so we see that Jesus is healing two blind men. Two blind men approach Jesus and they ask Jesus to heal him. Jesus says, "Hey, what do you want me to do with you?" And he says, "We want to be healed." What Jesus does is he lays hands on them. He speaks to them. He heals them. And then they follow him. After that, now we see that Jesus is moving from Jericho and he's moving toward Jerusalem. There's a stop in Bethpage. Now, as we look at Bethpage from Jerusalem, it's about 2 miles. That's the equivalent of being here at the Lilly Grove campus and traveling or walking to Texas Southern University. Wow, not far, right? Yeah. So when we move into that and we see that even though Jesus has work he's doing work and prophecy fulfilled, let's talk about the word prophecy. Prophecy is the foretelling of an event, but not the fortune telling of an event. Let's get that clear. Foretelling of event and fortune telling is totally different. Now let's stay away from fortune telling, because fortune telling has to do with tarot cards, horoscopes, and reading of the future, which God is not in. If you want to do some homework, go ahead and look up not David, but Saul, and what happens with him in the medium. And so, or your parents can talk to you about that as well. So as we move into our lesson, we can get to our very first point.
Matthew chapter 21, verses 1 through 5. And they approached Jerusalem and came to Bethphage on the Mount of Olives. Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you, and at once you will find a donkey tied there, with her coat by her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, say that the Lord needs them, and he will send them right away." This took place to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet. "Say to daughter Zion, see, your king comes to you, gentle and riding on a donkey, and on a coat and the foal of a donkey."
Our very first point is the presence of the prophet. Verses 1 through 7 talk about as I broke it out, it talks about the process, but then we see a person, but then we see prophecy being fulfilled. But then we look at some patience being exercised. Let's talk about the process in verses 1 and 2. Now, when they got there, they said that Jesus tells them to go into this village. He tells them to go into this village, and then you will find a donkey or a colt tied together. And he says, untie them and then bring them to me. Now, hold on, just wait a minute. Now, Jesus is with them, so how is he telling them how to go find something? And he's been with them the whole time. Jesus is all knowing. And because he has some work to do, he knows that this is going to be, and these two disciples who he's telling this to, we will later find out will be Peter and John, because they always traveled with him. But he tells them to go, and now they had to have some trust in Jesus' word. When was the last time you trusted someone's word when they told you to do something that you just didn't really understand? That's what faith is about. We trust that what God has said in his word will come to pass. And so what they do is they're obedient. And they go and find it, and he says to them, if someone says anything to you, you tell them that the Lord has need of it. Now, here's a second thing for you. Now, why would anyone come up to you and say, hey, or if they asked you, hey, I need your Xbox because the Lord needs it. I need your PS4 because the Lord needs it. I need your new Jordans or your new Kyries or KDs or your LeBrons. I need those because the Lord needs them. Well, that's because their heart, this persons who owned this colt and this donkey, their hearts were they were selfless hearts and unselfish as well. And that's a question, because what we see in here, that this person who's ownership of these things, we don't know his name, doesn't require any credit in the story, but then he realizes that nothing really belongs to him anyway. That it's all used for God's service. And that's the way we need to look at life on today. That nothing we own on today, nothing we have, whether it be cars, clothes, homes, or anything, nothing really belongs to us. It all belongs to God, and all is to be used for his glory and for whatever he sees fit for it to be. So here's something that you can do. How does that look? It can sometimes come in the form of salvation. You could have a friend at your home one day, and they're just coming over to play video games with you, or to do something, just have some fun. And yet they get invited to church with you, or your parents come in and say, hey, we got to go to church or something. And they've never been to church, and they begin to ask questions about it. Well, then at the end of the weekend, they come to church with you, and they want to know who Jesus is. That's how this works. Even things sort of like that are tidbits on how people can come to Jesus Christ and how they're used for service. In that moment, you guys just coming together just to play video games or just coming hanging out for the weekend, that turned into a moment that someone was ready to receive Christ in their hearts. And so let's, as we journey throughout our days and our weeks, let's not be so in a hurry to miss out on moments that we can share the good news of Jesus Christ with others. Now, as we move forward to the process and then we look at the person, now there's prophecy to be fulfilled. And when we look into the verse 4 and 5, it was all to be done because of one verse. And I mentioned to you what prophecy was. It was the foretelling of an event. And so in the foretelling of the event, we have to go back to the book of Zechariah. That's in the Old Testament, by the way, toward the end. And so in Zechariah chapter 9, verses 9 and 10, by the way, verse 9 speaks of Jesus fulfilling this with the donkey and the colt. Verse 10 talks about Jesus' second coming when he comes back for us again. But this one right here, verse 9 and 9, is what we can focus on, which is the foretelling of verses 4, 5, and 6 in our lesson on today. And so when we see that this prophecy needed to be fulfilled, let's look at the timeline of this. Zechariah 9 and 9 all the way to Matthew 21, 5 and 6 is 500 years. Zechariah spoke this 500 years, and here Jesus is 500 years later coming to fulfill this word. That speaks of what? It speaks of patience, and it speaks of time, but it also speaks of trusting that whatever God says, he's going to fulfill. And so as we move, let's move on into our next part of a lesson. It is that they put down what they had, and they put it on this colt and this horse and this donkey. for Jesus to be put on. Here's the second part of our lesson.
Matthew chapter 21, verses 6 through 11. The disciples went and did as Jesus had instructed them, and they brought the donkey and the coat and placed their cloaks on them for Jesus to sit on. A very large crowd spread their cloaks on the road, while others cut branches from the trees and spread them on the road. The crowds that went ahead of him and those that followed shouted, "Hosanna to the Son of David! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord! Hosanna in the highest heaven!" When Jesus entered Jerusalem, the whole city was stirred and asked, "Who is this?" The crowds answered, "This is Jesus, the prophet from Nazareth in Galilee."
Part of our lesson. The second part is the procession of the people, which is verses 8 through 11. In the procession of the people, we see two main things here. We see verbalizing and we see recognizing going on. In the verbalizing that these people see, the multitudes come together, and as they come together, they scream out, "Hosanna to the Son of David." Now remember, when we see the Son of David, that takes us all the way back to the very beginning of the book of Matthew. And I mentioned that to you last week. Matthew chapter 1 gives you the genealogy of Jesus, meaning that David, King David, the one we see in Psalm, that he is one of Jesus' relatives. And because of that, they now scream out and exclaim that Hosanna, the Son of David, blessed is he that comes in the name of the Lord. Here it is, Hosanna in the highest. Now, what does the word Hosanna mean? Hosanna is more of a praise, but it's also more of a cry as well. Well, how can you do crying and praising at the same, or rejoicing at the same time? Well, what happens in our lesson on today is that these people saw Jesus in a different way than what he had really come for. They saw Jesus as a warrior king, one who was going to fight, and overthrow the government of the day, which was the Roman government. But that's not what Jesus came for. Jesus came to save and seek those who were lost. Now, they thought he was coming to just come and just go all out like the Avengers, or he was going to go out and fight and tear up things. And that's not really came to do. And so they were looking for him to come and siege war against them and take charge. And that didn't happen. It would happen. The Roman government would be overthrown. It just wouldn't be overthrown during Jesus' earthly ministry. But as we see this cry for help, and we see that this cry for praise as well, we also see them recognize him as king, but we also see them verbalize it as well. And when we see them verbalizing it, we see that they're calling him out for Hosanna in the highest, that he's, and also that who he is in verses 10 and 11. And it says, when they came into Jerusalem, they saw the city was moving, and said, "Who is this?" And the last thing is, the multitude said, "This is Jesus, the prophet, Nazareth of Galilee." Now here's our lasting word for you. Now that we know that who Jesus is and we see his triumphant entry, we can say to ourselves on today, what do we take away? We take away this, that it's our job to go out and share Jesus to the world. How do you do that? You can do that in different mediums. You can do that by talking to someone about him. You can do it by how you walk. You can do it by how you talk. You can do it by how people see you from day to day. But remember this, that we all need Jesus. And if you don't know him, you can get to know him. You can come by the church. You can talk to someone in the team ministry, in the youth ministry here at Lilly Grove. You can talk to any one of the ministers on staff, and we can walk, or even through your parents, and we can walk you through how to receive Jesus in your heart. And so that's our lesson for this week. I hope you got something out of it. Have a great week.